Hello and welcome to the It's a Guitar YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at vintage Fender amps in master volumes. This has been something I've been curious about myself, and we've got my Super Reverb here as kind of the test subject because I think this is the perfect amp to really test this with. So, typically for me, I don't really associate master volumes in vintage Fender amps. I know people have been doing this mod for a while now. There's a bunch of variations of it, but I've just never really heard stellar results from that. And for some reason, just the way Fenders work, just the way the gain stages work and everything, I've always been a little dubious of a master volume in a Fender. Now, that could be totally incorrect, and that assumption could have just been completely false. We will find out in this video. That's what I like to do. I like to test things for myself. So really, the Super Reverb, I think, is the perfect amp for this because it has a 2-ohm output, 2-ohm output transformer, which means it's a little wonky with attenuators. Most attenuators do not have a 2-ohm output, and once you change it from 2-ohm to 4-ohm, things get a little different. It's not really damaging or harmful to the amp, especially something as overbuilt as a Super Reverb, but it's not ideal. So potentially there's a chance that the master volume might actually work better than an attenuator for just knocking a little bit off, and that's what I want to test. If you're curious about this amplifier at all, I've done a whole series on it, all on my YouTube channel. I'll put a playlist up in the corner as well as in the description. I've done a ton of work, a bunch of caps, resistors replaced, etc., etc. And yeah, this is just kind of, in addition to all that other work, maybe the icing on the cake. We will find out. So let's go through the parts list real quick of what's required and kind of my hope here. So first and foremost, you'll see I've already got a pot here and a knob. This is where the ground switch is typically. Now the ground switch, once you properly install a 3-prong in a vintage Fender like this, it becomes useless. There's really nothing. You basically wire out of circuit. So some people keep it in there to do like a negative feedback mod or something where they take out the negative feedback to give it a bit more gain, a bit more snarl. I'm not a huge fan of that in Fenders personally. So instead, we're going to repurpose that hole with the master volume pot. So it's out of the way. It's easily reversible, kind of exactly what I am into personally. So to do it, we've got a 250K linear dual gain pot. What that means is 2 pots in one. You can kind of see it here. It's basically like 2 pots stacked on top of each other. And again, the value is 250K in linear. My preference will be linear for master volume, but you can try audio. You might like that better. And yeah, we've got it hooked up here. And the points we're going to be kind of tapping into would be this. This is the bias feed. So this is the bias pot here. And this wire you'll see goes here, goes under the board, and goes to this eyelet right here. You can see that. And that's kind of the cross section between these 220K bias leak resistors. So this is really where the bias for the power tubes kind of takes place. And this is a very critical part of the circuit. You'll notice I've already replaced the 2 carbon comp resistors with high quality Vichy power metal films, which are very stable 2-watt resistors, because this is a very important part of the circuit. So basically what we're going to do is you're going to take the feed, the bias feed you see right here. We're going to use this eyelet. We're going to take that feed and run it to the pot. We're going to remove these 2 220K resistors and use the 250K pots as kind of the stand-in for that. We'll be adding in safety resistors to the pots as well, just in case something goes wrong with the pot. We don't lose bias completely, because if you do, your tubes will go into meltdown and be a very bad day. Hopefully you don't take out a transformer in the process. And then we'll also be connecting this point right here at the end of the coupling caps to the pots as well. And then the pots will be going here to the grids. So right here and here, there will be a connection there as well. So lots going on here, but it's actually not too complicated to do. And yeah, I'll walk you guys through it. But first, I want to go ahead and record a before so that we have a before and after, because I'm really curious if there really is no difference in the tone with the master volume on 10 once it's installed. So we're going to record the bass line, and then from there, we'll start doing the work, and then we'll A/B the before and after to see if it really made a difference or not on 10. And then obviously we'll see how it sounds as we go down a little bit on the volume. So without further ado, let's get going. Now that we've got the bass line recorded, we can go ahead and get to work. So we'll just go ahead and confirm there's no voltage in the amp. You can see there's none, 0.5 volts DC, which is nothing. So we know it is safe to work on. It is unplugged from the wall as well. Always want to do that to be safe. Now, there's not a ton that you have to do to make this work. It's a pretty simple setup overall. Under the board, there are 3 wires that we need to take note of. The first is this wire coming off the bias feed. So this is obviously the bias pot. This is going under the board, going to this eyelet right here. So we have to make note of that, but we don't have to touch this one. We can leave it because we'll just connect a wire right here to this eyelet where it's still connected. But then on these 2 eyelets, there are these 2 wires going under the board. These are going to pin 1 of the 2 tube sockets, which then go through a 1.5K resistor to pin 5. That's your grids there. So we will be redoing those connections going to this right here, to the pot, which means that those wires going underneath, we will need to remove them, or we can maintain them there and just heat shrink off the original wires. I'm not sure what I want to do yet. I think I'll probably just remove them because it's fairly easy, and I'll obviously just save them for later if I decide I don't want to keep the mod, but you could conceivably just save them and not really touch it at all. So anyways, let's go ahead and get to work. And first up, we'll just kind of lift up the caps so we have easy access to the resistors. Go ahead and try to lift up both of the resistors on this end. Let's just see if I can do this. There we go. So now we should be able to just easily pop these resistors out. Your mileage may vary because I had just recently replaced these resistors, so I know it should be easy based off of how I did it. You might not have as easy of a time, but it should be pretty straightforward. Now we got 3 eyelets. We want to go ahead and take our solder sucker, our wick, whatever you've got to clean out those eyelets. Remove as much solder as possible, make them nice, fresh, clean so you can see what you're working on. Awesome. So now that those 3 are clear, we can see clearly the wire here, the wire here, and the wire here. In fact, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see that closer. So you've got this wire and this wire. That's the red and yellow wires right here that are going under the board, hooking on here. And then this wire right there that you can just barely see is this wire going under the board. So those are the 3 wires connected. So I will make sure I do not have tubes in those tube sockets since we are going to be heating up the pins. So we'll go ahead and remove those now. And what I could do is literally just heat shrink that bit right here. Just have them tucked up and under. We're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and pull it through, which means we need to disconnect this right here. So lift this up so we give ourselves a little bit of room. So now we should be able to get these wires to come out. I should just pull right out here. There's 1. There's 2. Alrighty, so now we've got these 3 empty. We can place those 2, and now we got 3 wires we need to connect. So I went ahead and just pre-twisted these 3 wires, cloth covered wire, so it doesn't look totally out of place in this amplifier. And I've got yellow, black, and white. And we want to make sure we keep our color codes straight here. So I think what I'll do, how do I want to do? So one of them will be for the bias, and one of them will be to go to the pot and then to the grids of each tube socket. We need those to stay the same all the way through. So I think what I'll do is, so it'll be something like this triangle right here. And then I can either choose to run it like this. I need to get to this pot here, or I could run it basically flat and then just run it straight over here like this. Start off by just soldering in this connection here. So we're going to go ahead and connect this white wire right here in this middle eyelet as part of the triangle. Careful not to burn anything around it. So those are going to go here and here respectively. Try and use the cap lead to kind of pin the wire down. So just like that, we've got the 3 connections there. Again, it's a bit hard to see, but you got the white going to the bias lead. This is going to here, so that's the white. White will be our bias. And then you've got the left and right coupling caps there, which will be all going to this pot. So we can now give it a little extra twist, make sure it's nice and tight. And let's run this up and under like so. Now I don't know offhand kind of, areas to avoid as far as noise is concerned. I think just tightly wrapping the wires like we have here should do a really good job of reducing noise. However, I'm not 100% sure if it's, let's call it quote unquote optimum or not. So we'll have to see. I'm sure somebody will let me know in the comments, but for right now, I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm just gonna leave that here. And now I'm gonna go ahead and throw up on the video here. I will find a schematic or a layout rather of how to wire this. It's gonna be really hard to show you guys, but it's pretty straightforward. So the first thing I'm gonna do is grab the resistors so we can get those in, and then we can kind of do everything else. But I will have the layout up for you guys so you can follow along as well. So this can be pretty tricky to get right. And once you've got the resistors kind of placed, they'll be from the, I guess you would consider the input. So the bias supply will be going to these 2 lugs here. You'll have one wire, this white wire will go to one of those lugs and a jumper wire to the other one. So they're both getting the same feed. Then you've got the 2 meg going from that, jumpering that lug to the wiper of both of the ends or the 2 pots is within the dual gain pot here. Now the resistors can be a bit tricky to get in there. So kind of what I like to do is just tack them on. So just add a little bit of solder just to kind of get them to hold in place. That way you don't really have to worry about them moving on you, and then you can kind of get everything placed because you're gonna have to fit wires in both of those eyelets in addition to the resistor. So it can be a bit tricky at times. So now we can focus on the wires. Like I said, the white will go to one of those, and then you have a jumper to the other. So let's grab our white. Nice thing about this cloth pushback style wire, it's very easy to reveal the wire. So now we just need to add a jumper wire from here to here. So we'll go ahead and grab another piece of cloth wire to do that. So before we connect the yellow and black, which are connected here to the caps, we're going to connect the grids of the tube sockets to the wiper of both of these positions. And again, we want to make sure we are keeping in mind which one went where. And so we had the red, which was this one, went to this tube. The yellow went to this. I'm talking about the original wire here. So this one went there, which means that the black, we want the black one to be this top set here. The yellow one will be this bottom set here, which means this tube socket will go to this wiper. This tube socket will go to this wiper. So just to keep these out of the way, it's easier for us to connect the wiper first to there, and then we can connect these last 2 since they're the top ones. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so we're doing black wire to mimic the black wire here. So we know the black one will be this tube socket all on this side of the gain pot. Again, just reference the layout I'll post for you guys to see. So now we'll get a yellow wire going from here to here. It can be nice and short. Perfect. So you won't really be able to see anything yet. I'll do maybe a close-up when we're done, but now we know yellow this side, black this side, so we just need to connect the last connection here. Super easy. Barely an inconvenience. So now the last thing left to do is to go ahead and add some heat shrink to this pin right here, just to make sure that there's no chance of that shorting out. Now we're done, but we want to go ahead and confirm that everything is showing correctly, that the tube sockets are receiving the correct bias voltage. So we're going to turn it on without any power tubes in it, and we're going to check what the voltages are at the grids here to make sure that everything is looking okay before we put any tubes in it. So this is our bias voltage, negative 43.7 volts, and we're going to go ahead and confirm that that's what we're seeing elsewhere in the amplifier. Make sure everything is showing correctly. That all looks good to me. Here we should see negative 43.7. Now, let's go ahead and check over here. So this spot right here should be the same as, see, that was yellow, so it should be the same as this. It is. Negative 42.8. It's the same. And then now we want to check on the tube sockets here. So that is the correct bias voltage. Okay, so that all looks good to me. Now let's check back here. So now let's go ahead and put our tubes in. So we'll turn it off and put our power tubes in and slowly bring up the voltage and confirm everything's okay. So we've got the variac and the current limiter in chain. So we're going to slowly bring up the voltage. We are getting negative voltage here, so that is good. Now the current limiter will throw off the negative bias voltage a little bit in chain, but we just want to make sure there's no catastrophic issues first. Okay, so the master volume does appear to be working. So now we can go ahead and turn it off, and we will connect the amp to the wall instead of the current limiter and the variac and do our A/B comparison there. See if it makes any difference in circuit or not. Actually, one thing we can check real quick, switch this over to ohms. Let's see if the resistance, so these were 220K, the resistance between here and here. So 235K, very close. For reference, the stock resistors in here measure 250 something. 240 and 230. Yep, so that's totally fine. So you can see the pot is basically acting as if there was the resistor between here to here and here to here. The pot is just basically playing that role in this case. So everything looks good to me. Excited to hear how it sounds. Let's go ahead, fire up the loop and switch the audio for you guys to hear. And let's see. I'm very curious. So it's a little too late. It's now what, 1:40 in the morning to really test it through the cabinet itself. First impressions, it really doesn't seem to do anything until maybe 6 or so. Very little difference in tone or volume to my ears between 10 and 7. So I'm curious to hear what that sounds like, but I wanted to hook it up to the multimeter to just measure the resistance between the grid and the bias point here. So, as you would expect, it should be a 220K resistor there. So we're looking at 234 using the pot, and that's on 10. So that's the maximum. And as we turn down, you'll notice the resistance goes down. So we're at 7 now. Doesn't want to give me the measurement here. So 7 is equivalent to 215K, whereas 10 was 234K. So not a big difference there. So let's see how this sweep kind of goes here. So you see by 5 we're at 130. So we've gone through half the pot's range, and we've gone through less than half of the resistance level there. So that has to do with the taper of the pot. And we saw a huge difference to our ears. Yeah, look at that. So just a tiny movement, you can see it jumps from about 30K down to about 14K, which is, maybe a millimeter or so of play there. So there's a huge drop off in volume there. And then you see it just falls off a cliff there. Whereas if we go up here, if I go between 10 and 9, see how much we lose. So there's literally no change, 10 to 9. So where does it start to change? So 10 to 8. 230K versus 235K. So there's really, that makes sense why we didn't hear any difference there. It's basically no difference at all. So right about 7 is actually the stock value of 220K there. So, between 10 and 7 really is nothing there. And then, like I was saying, 6 is where it starts to change. I guess my ears were correct because that's when I started to hear a little bit of a tonal change. So yeah, I guess I can just look at it as, 10 to 7 is really nothing. 7 is actually kind of the starting point, maybe. That's more, the stock value, if you will. So starting on 7, if I understand, and I might be incorrect here, but I think I can look at it roughly like that. 220K, it's roughly how it should sound stock with the original 220K resistors in there. And then anything above that should be very little change, and anything below that should be a pretty drastic change. I might even make it so that 7 is 10 on the knob, just for my own sake here. Maybe I'll find 220K and put 10 on there. All right, so what is that? Just about 7. So let's go ahead and change the knob, and let's circle back tomorrow morning when I can actually hear it through the cab. Okay, so I've got the chassis back in the cabinet here, and I got a chance to play the amp for a bit here with the master volume installed. So I'm going to show you guys what that looks like. Again, just reused that ground switch positions. It's nice and tucked out of the way. It's very low key, and you can still easily reach it from the back and feel it. Obviously, I don't have the back panel on right now, but yeah, it's a pretty decent location overall. And yeah, my thought overall is a bit mixed, to be honest. Initial thoughts, so I have it set right now. This is the maximum, and let me bump up the ISO a little bit so you guys can see into the shadows. So this is currently set to its maximum. So this is the basically all the way off, except for we discovered that actually for it to be all the way off, I set the knob to be correct so that 10 all the way up like that is 220K, which is what the stock resistors would have been. So this whole range is essentially useless. There's no change in tone from here to here. This is exactly its stock and a little bit of additional resistance from stock, but there's no audible difference between this whole part of the range. So that's kind of frustrating and makes it a little useless in some ways. So I think I'm going to possibly change the safety resistors in there, which I think will be able to get me closer to the final range of 220K at 10, and then from there. So I'm hoping that'll change because we were getting about 230 something. But part of it also is the taper of the pot. Now this is a linear taper 250K alpha. I've seen many people use these. I've used them myself. And maybe this one's just really funky, but yeah, the taper is pretty terrible. So yeah, this whole range is useless. Once we get to 10, this is where we're actually at the stock value. And basically from 10 to, 8.5 is really no change either. And then a pretty decent change going from 8 to 7, and kind of 6.5. 6 range is kind of as low as I would want to go, where it doesn't dramatically change the tone. And then the off in this case is actually 3, because we've lost basically 3 positions worth of the knob range because of the value change. So basically, if we look at it, 3 is 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 on the knob is kind of as low as I would want to go, and 5 is still sounds good, and it was kind of where I landed on most of the time. But to be honest, for clean tones, the amp sounds great on its stock value, and it doesn't, having breakup isn't necessarily the Super Reverb's thing for those kind of clean tones. It sounds great otherwise. What I want to do is compare this to the Fryette Power Station to really see which one is better for getting those kind of driven tones from a Super Reverb at a more reasonable volume. In my initial just quick little testing I did, to be honest, they're very different. This master volume really changed the tone once I got it low enough to be kind of tolerable in the room here with the amp cranked, whereas the Power Station was able to keep that tone, keep more of the drive and everything, and get it much, much quieter. So it was a lot more effective at that. So if you really, my initial thought is if you really want really gainy, really strong driven tones from a Super Reverb, think like the amp on, say, 6, somewhere in that range. And you want to maintain kind of the full body of that, but just get a lot quieter. Initial thoughts is the Fryette Power Station is much better at that. But if you want to take a little bit off the top, you don't want to have an extra unit and all of that, then this is not a bad way to go. I certainly don't think it's a net negative having it on. It doesn't really do anything. Like I said, this is stock, and although I haven't listened to the audio comparison before and after yet, even though I've shot it, I will do that, and maybe I'll put in a little note here from me as the editor later. Initial thoughts is it didn't sound any different to me. So assuming that's the case, and really there's no tonal change there, yeah, it's not a bad thing to have in case you're in a bind and you need to just knock off a little bit. But there's a pretty drastic tone change once you get to a certain point, and this amp is so loud that this is not really knocking off a ton. When you're getting from effectively the 10 range down to 7 range, there's not a big jump, or drop in volume. It's very, very still very loud, right? So it is a drop in volume, but it's not not really going to change things. You know, if you're at a gig and they're like, hey, you're too loud, that's not really going to make it quiet enough to really move the needle in that regard. 6 is where it starts to do that, but that's when you start getting a tone change. So that's my initial thoughts from doing it. And yeah, I will do a follow-up on this, and maybe it'll be a dedicated video comparing this to the Fryette Power Station for Fender amps. I've got my Vibrolux reverb, which I think I'm going to do this to as well, just to have. It's kind of nice. It's just a backup just in case. And if I do that, I'll do a follow-up video, and I'll probably do that comparison with both amps and the Power Station, since the Vibrolux is a lower wattage, gainier amp than the Super Reverb, and that might be a fun follow-up. But yeah, overall, I'm not mad at it, but I don't think it's necessarily the silver bullet that some people might be looking for. So with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, guys. And yeah, if you want to see more content working on amps such as this beautiful Super Reverb, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, see ya.